Hello, my dear friend, and welcome to the Spiritually Engineered Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the human experience from a spiritual perspective. Come on in, and I invite you to stay. So recently, I just took a weekend training to be Wilderness First Aid certified. A little something that I did, a professional development opportunity that I decided to take as part of my work, especially being on the trails and being in areas at times that not always necessarily remote, but I felt like this is an important skill set to have, not even just in my work, but even, let's say, if I'm going out with friends and we're going out hiking or something, or going out away from the city. I was just thinking about it. When I think about my own personal development and training, technical training, I look at it from like that sense of how applicable and how much can it translate in other parts of my life and where I can use it. And I don't necessarily am looking for something that's just like very niche, something specific, unless it's something, it's really circumstantial. But for this one, part of it is, but then part of it also is just, it's a good tool to have. And I've also been trained before. Little fun fact, when I was in college, I used to be an outdoor instructor, taking students with a co-instructor out on climbing trips, caving, backpacking and hiking, and all sorts of things. And also doing team facilitations and working people through a ropes course that we had on our campus. It was one of my most fondest experiences I've had in college, And sometimes I reminisce about the days in college because they were pretty awesome, and that being one of them. Especially because a city boy, most of his life up to that point, and then going to the college I went to and discovering this outdoor program. I think for me, it was just it opened up a whole new world. Where initially I thought I was like, I don't know what's that saying. Like, I'm probably gonna butcher it here, but I'll say it anyway. It's like a small fish in a big pond, or a big fish in a small pond. But then it's like there's an entire ocean of just like, whoa, like switching from like a pond to an ocean of just the world, the vastness, and just of so much that's out there, an expansion of my world, you could say. And, it was from that time that I developed a love and appreciation for the outdoors, especially, I spent a lot of time inside, oftentimes because of playing video games. That's like one of my biggest things growing up. I'm still a gamer now. Not something that I want to completely remove from my life, but at least at this point in my life, I'm spending less time of it and allowing more time to do other important things like my spiritual work, like this podcast and other works other projects that I'm working on. So the Wilderness First Aid. So this training that I just took, all in all, it definitely felt something. It definitely was a surprise. It definitely was an experience that had its moments of surprise, and not that I had any expectations really. I did feel anxious and nervous beforehand. Usually because I just like knowing that there's going to be a testing portion. Like, oh, I gotta take the training, just from prior experience, right? Because I forgot to mention, like, because I took the first aid training. I've taken what's called the Wilderness First Responder, which is a lot more intensive and a lot longer duration, like about a week's worth, like 80 plus hours, depending on the instructor and the organization that's administering the training in the court and the test. And so I'm no stranger when it comes to working in this setting. It's just that it's been a long time. It's been a long time. So coming back to it kind of brought me back, especially learning about some of the terminologies and things that just remind me of like, oh yeah, that's right, I forgot about that. And other things I'm like, yeah, I completely forgot about that. And I think for me, one of the big things that really added to a lot to the experience had to be the instructors, Raquel and Brittany. They were tremendous, tremendous instructors. And I think how they showed up and presenting the material, I think it's like, it's very important. Like there's one thing, like you have a subject, right? Say you were um, you instruct a particular topic. It could be anything. It could be the most boring thing ever, right? And plus, not that this was anything boring really to me, but to just say that, right? But I think like if someone, like it takes a certain individual, it takes certain qualities within an individual that anybody can tap into to bring out something fun and alive and passion into like teaching something that on the surface like it looks kind of boring, you know. And I'm sure for many first aid, like it sounds boring or whatever. I'm sure other people look at it like, wow, it's definitely important. Others would appreciate. I consider everything, I think first aid is a big thing, you know. And so with the materials, I think because of how they showed up and the joy and even enthusiasm that they exude, like the exuberance of it all, of their energy, really was felt. At least I felt it. I don't know about my classmates, but I definitely felt it. And I definitely felt super engaged for the most part. Although it wasn't until the last day, on the last day of the training, where because we've gone through so much, and it's a combination of a lot of other things too, and also because I had to take the metro and commute by bike as well too, may have contributed. Where I started to dwindle in my focus, and I found myself kind of like, oh wait, come back, Space Cadet, come back, Earth to Albin, come back. um, but for the most part, I was like really engaged with what they were teaching, and it was amazing. Just aside from the technical stuff, one of the things I know that they're really passionate about it. When they talk about wilderness first aid, their approach is holistic, looking at everything, not just the technical, not just the physiological, but the emotional, the mental aspect to it. The mental, that would include like mental health, looking at all the important things, and even just looking at the materials that they gave us. They have a section about like natural medicines that could assist with certain like things, certain like ailments or whatever, which really speaks volumes of like the knowledge of the instructors and what they put together here. It's like really, really solid stuff here, man. It's like, to me, this is like a good example of like excellence, in this context, and it's so inspiring to me. And so, and so we're just kind of with their energy and how they present themselves and the excitement and just sharing about a lot of things, it's just to me that I resonate with that. And I think that's something that many of us do in many ways. It's like that. I think what's been happening is like they really want to connect with each of us, not just like talking at us. Because we did have opportunity to practice the stuff when we have our classroom setting, and then we've had multiple sessions where we work with groups of twos in pairs, groups of threes, or even like giant groups, and we talk about, we work through some of the stuff, like much like I talk about my spiritual path and what I share on this podcast of like making it practical, right? Learning the knowledge and all these things, and then having the time to just work on them and practice them, because that's a very important thing too. Knowledge, but no practice, then what good is the knowledge? Knowledge is just like half the battle, at least in this regard. So it's a lot of good practice, getting involved, chit-chatting with people, getting to know some people as well too. I've met a lot of good people there. They were pretty awesome to work with. And yeah, like I said, the container was just, it was nicely set. So much so, it's like, I even, like one of the things that I do when I work with my guides, one of the practices I do is I tune in to them and I ask for a key word. Sometimes I might get a knowing, or I might get an understanding or a picture, but I'll still distill it down to a word. And that word serves as like a pivot. That's like a big picture key word that represents the what they see, because our spirit guides have a bird's eye view of our situation. They can see the bigger picture. And so the keyword that I often receive when I look back, so like, let me take a step back. So I get a keyword, right? So I get a keyword to get a big picture of the opportunity, have the experience, and then I come back and regroup on that keyword. And so when I do that, especially like when I take, which is like a thing with college courses, the Way Shorts college courses and programs. I always find some nugget, some gold nugget that came from that, which is to me also confirmed, like, wow, I definitely do have that help, and I'm definitely not alone, because you can't make it up, at least with some of the stuff that I've put together, in working with my team. So when I got there, I was like, let me go ahead and just actually tune into a keyword. And my keyword for that whole training was column. And to me, when I think about column, what that means to me is I think about the structure, the structural column that serves as like a pillar or a foundation. Like, and that of itself is like a very big thing for me. That's part of like why I teach, why I share my knowledge, because my intention is to help people build on their foundations, their inner foundations, their columns, in such a way that it's resilient, it's firm, and can withstand the toughest storms. And so for me, I decided to do that last minute. When I was just there, like, I felt the need to do that. And I can remember at a certain point where I was noticing the energy that felt very similar to when I've done weekend retreats, when I've done like a week-long retreat. And it was a 3-day endeavor, or technically 2.5, but it legit felt like a week compacted into a weekend. A week into a weekend. And to me, that says a lot, because whenever that sense of like time doesn't start to, like, loses meaning, and it's just like it feels long and short, it just like it loses meaning, right? I don't know, I can't really explain it much in terms of like how I've experienced it, other than just that way, where it's just like, it's just in the moment, taking it all in and just being there, being 100% involved, giving my all, and just like that to me has been a good indicator that the energy, the container, is pretty high, because out in the universe, it's timeless. Time is just a mechanism for here in this system of planet Earth, but it's not necessarily the same thing out there in the universe. It operates entirely different. I mean, I would say maybe there is not even any time at all in the universe, but I think there is a rhythm and flow, a routine. Much like here on planet Earth, so too is out there in the universe. At least what I've put together. And so just, becoming aware of all that is just, to me, I'm glad I went to that one, because I was supposed to go originally a previous time, but I had an incident. I had a little incident where I wasn't able to go. It was actually a car accident. Thankfully, it wasn't fatal. It wasn't serious. It wasn't severe, but it did. I had to miss the previous opportunity to go, and there was a lot of takeaways. I actually did a podcast episode about that last year. I think it was like, if you look back on October, November, one of those. If you, I'll leave it to you to research it and find out what it is. But the icon of the cover art of that episode gives it away. So if you ever want to know about that particular episode, I'm not going to share it here, but check that out. But it's around that time frame of like October, November of 2025. And so going back to like the weekend, definitely a lot of cool things that I've been learning. It's interesting how the instructors, was teaching us about like how there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of myths, misinformation when in the medical field and whatnot. And they were explaining a lot of things, and even like in the booklets, they have different sections too, where there is like, it dispels a lot of stuff, backed by research and like looking at a lot of studies and stuff. It's It's so fascinating to me because what could be considered truth at one moment that's been accepted by a huge population, by so many people, at some point becomes outdated and does not is not reflective of the current reality type of thing. It's, in other words, it's almost like a truths that morph. Like, yeah, I don't know if that makes sense if I'm if you're catching my drift here. But it's interesting that common beliefs and what people commonly accept, just because it's commonly accepted doesn't mean it is truth type of thing. You know, one of the, like, just to get a little technical here, like one of the things that I always thought when it came to like TBI or traumatic brain injury was that you never, like, the patient is never supposed to go to sleep type of thing. But in fact, the reality is sleep is actually important for the patient, especially if they've gotten a TBI. Where the misinformation came from is that when it comes to being out in the field, because when especially in the context of wilderness first aid, it's first aid customized in situations where we're working with limited resources and dealing with fixed and transient obstacles. Fixed being, like, let's say, like a river, or for example, or transient being like the weather or a storm kind of a thing. Things that are like have variables in them that aren't predictable. And so going back to the TBI situation, so because we're in an environment that we're dealing with limited resources, it's important that patients that are suspected of TBI injuries, traumatic brain injury, is because of the fact that there's limited medical resources. It's important that they stay awake, because if they were to go under, that they were to fall asleep in the wilderness setting where there's limited resources, there aren't reliable medical devices to monitor for any changes that would be really important to know. The difference between where someone's state can be stable can go to unstable really quick, really fast. And so it's because of that. That's why it's like the saying, like, TBI patients should not be sleeping in areas where there's limited resources. It's perfectly fine if they're under proper medical care, because they have the technology and stuff to be able to monitor that when they go to sleep. So that way, if anything goes wrong, they'll catch it, easily. So that's like, one little tidbit there, little fun fact there for you. And it's just amazing just learning about the nuances and looking at this whole holistically aspect to it. And even I remember one of the things that they talk about also is takes into consideration races, like skin color, of like when it comes to like when it, let's say if you want to identify there's a circulation problem in an individual, in medical texts oftentimes they'll teach about like look for like red or a particular color that would normally be seen in light skinned people, but doesn't factor in like darker skinned folks. And so they brought up a disparity of like in the medical field, that really there's like this racial kind of a thing where it's just like this racial disparity, and where like certain people will not get that, there's this assumption and ignorance about, that really can impede, me as a rescuer, my ability to fully show up and to be there and to help the person there, to give them proper care, and it's just like, it really shows like to me like those little flaws and whatnot in the systems that we have. And keep in mind, I understand that when it comes to our systems here in this planet, none of it is perfect, because I know it's human nature. There's going to be margin of errors. There's going to be like these mistakes. There's going to be a lot of things, right? I think that's part of the package deal when it comes to the human experience, when it comes to moving through life and working with systems here on this planet, whether it's my own or I'm working with the collective or an organization or something or somebody else's system. So those are some of the things that I thought was super interesting. That's just like that. I think it really does. Like, I think having more knowledge and awareness of it, at least for me, I can really just show up better. Especially in my role. I can be of service to people that way. And just taking into consideration those barriers that are there. Because sometimes there are barriers that are not like quite obvious, you know. It's almost like very subtle, you know. And because of that lack of awareness, that's why there are a lot of things like that are very subtle. And but like going back to the switch with like patients that are dealing with a circulation issue, I remember like one of the things that they share with like that was important to look at is to look at I don't know if you ever like as a kid, I don't know if you ever did like you pulled like down on your eyelid, the lower ones. I remember just like thinking back of like I don't know if it was from like cartoons or just doing it with my friends. I would just like pull both my eyelids, my lower eyelids down, where you can see the pink underneath my eye, and I'll just like stick my tongue out going yeah. But that aside, but like they mentioned like the proper way to consider everybody, no matter their race, their skin tone, because that's not a reliable way to tell. You can't assume because it looks different for everybody in terms of like circulation problems. It can't just you can't grab a broad stroke. You can't grab a brush and do a broad stroke across the spectrum and think it's going to be like that. But they mentioned like looking underneath like the pink on the eye, and that we all have, you know, no matter what your skin color, right? And that's what's beautiful, and that's like the cool thing about it, because like they're looking at things that they're teaching us stuff to look at things that are more, I want to say universal and more like inclusive, especially when it comes to like people of different racial backgrounds and stuff. So I thought that was pretty cool, you know, just seeing that, you know, again going back to the, you know, the holistic aspect of their approach to wilderness medicine, and I think it's pretty awesome, you know. And so one of the things, one of the meats of this episode that I wanted to talk about that was like a huge takeaway, aside from like learning so much in the span of 2.5 days, one of the big things that I wanted to share with you, my friend, it goes back to breath work. For me, when it comes to breath work, our relationship has been like an on and off thing, you know? And I mean that in terms of like practice. There'll be a period of time of my life where I'm like intentionally practicing it. Then it kind of fades away and I just get involved in stuff, or at least in my involvement in things, it just kind of, all right, it's done with that, whatever. And it's just, all right, now I'm just experiencing life. And then I'm like, oh, and then when like, in a sense, when like shit hits the fan, not necessarily, but like in those moments of unease comes up, or I like to use the word dis-ease, then I find myself coming back to breath work. And breath work is such a valuable thing. I can see how some of my friends are really all about it, like really passionate about it, because, you know, figuratively and literally, it's life. The tempo of our breath, it's like when it's in its natural state, it's like the flow of our own energetic natural state as a soul. It's like a good reflection, right? I'm exaggerating my breath, right? But like, you know, there's that natural flow, but then when there's that dis-ease, it can be or it can just be really slow and like lethargic, you know, or it's not like much going through, you know. So it's a good barometer, and it's a good something to check, to be like, oh. And it's one of those things that when I'm dealing with life and in situations, I'm like high stress situations, whatever, it's amazing how I just lose touch of my breath, and I'm like involved in a thing, and then I catch myself like breathing fast, or like, oh, and I'm feeling tense in my muscles, oftentimes in my shoulders, in my shoulder and neck area, where I tend to store a lot of stress personally. And so early on in the course, in the training, I legit was about to say retreat. Like I said, it felt like it, the energy. Early on in the training, they told us about, they shared with us an important technique called the reset technique. So it's a specific type of breathwork technique that really goes back to like our bodily memories. Think about as you were a child, right? And I'll explain actually to give more context into it. So like how the technique works, and this is something that you can take with you and feel free to use. Where the simple, like to explain a technique as simple as possible, is you do 2 quick inhalations, and then you exhale. And of course, you exhale through your mouth. 2 quick inhalations through the nose, and then 1 nice long exhalation through the mouth. And what I learned is that the part when you look at the inhalation, the 2 inhalations, right? What does that remind you of? What I learned is like, oh, it's that memory of like when it comes to like to crying, to like a little bit of like sobbing, like, it's like a way to like to help with like regulating when something really emotional, something is going on in our nervous system. And so it's like as I mentioned earlier, like that bodily memory tapping back into something that we did because it did serve the purpose to help regulate ourselves, our energy, our our mental emotional states. And so, when it comes to like being out there in the wilderness, and I remember I was having some conversations with my classmates about it, you know, or even just like looking at any high stress situations. To me, it's like I know it's a lot of value because when life comes through, and especially like when there's storms coming through, and it can be a storm can be very subtle and soft, or it can be like acute and sharp and like very like drastic, right? At least that's my understanding of it. Like, to explain the soft component to it, think like if when you get anxious about something, or at least when I get anxious about something, or I have something on my mind, I'm just like those moments of dis-ease. It's not acute, but I'm still experiencing some dis-ease, right? So, with breath work, it always brings the main key when it comes to breath work is regulation. It's to come back, the regulation of our nervous system, to switch us from the sympathetic state to the parasympathetic state. The sympathetic is the fight or flight, freeze or fawn, to the parasympathetic, rest and digest, right? Just to kind of explain it from an anatomical point of view, right? The knowledge aspect to it, right? But from the spiritual component, it's bringing us from that state of dis-ease back to ease, back to center, back to self. Because I know when I'm faced with like storms in all of its degree and variety, what happens with my energy is that I become fragmented. I start worrying about, I get caught up in the past, I might get caught up in the future. I start worrying about one particular thing. I start to get tunnel vision. One of the things that they talk about that happens in high stress situation. And when one of the instructors was telling us about, the technique and sharing with us, like one of the things that they talk about with our parasympathetic state, as opposed to with our sympathetic state. When we're in a sympathetic state, our mind is tunnel vision. We're focused on very few things, and that's all that's right there in front of us. And we don't pay attention to anything else in our surroundings. When we are in our parasympathetic state, our periphery starts to widen, and we don't focus on that small thing anymore. And that's the state we want to be in. I need to be in, especially as a rescuer. I need to be aware of the environment. Even if there's some stuff going on and there's like some high stress situations, and it might be coming from other people, or it might be coming from the situation. Maybe it's in the middle of a lightning storm or something. You name it. For me, why I appreciate that technique, because it's like practical skills to just take with me. Especially like imagine like if I'm in a situation like that, if I have to help, I'm helping somebody, offering aid to somebody that needs it, to make sure I've got myself. So one of the things that I appreciate about the training, when it comes to first aid, selfishness is actually healthy. Meaning like, I need to make sure I got myself before I move in to help somebody. Like they have methodical steps that they taught us, like scene survey, primary assessment, secondary assessment. They're very methodical. But the first step always is making sure like, okay, check the scene, make sure I'm good. Do I got my personal protection equipment? Do I have a mask? Do I have like all those things to make sure I got myself before I move in? Because in this context, if I'm operating out of selflessness, then not only is that person not going to get helped, but then I'm going to become a liability. And I'm going to become a patient as well in that situation, thus needing to send additional support. Where the problem was, this particular size now has grown. So to me, when I look at it in the context of first aid, it's from a spiritual perspective. This is why when, what I've learned in the college is like we have our loyalties. And I'm going to say it in the eye. My first loyalty is to myself. My second loyalty is to my community, my friends and families, think in that regard. And then my third loyalty is to the bigger picture. You could say the society or the whole planet, right? That's something that we all share. But notice that the first loyalty always starts with you first. And mind you, it's not about me first, me second, me third. It's where do I begin? I start with me, operate from there, make sure I'm good, make sure I got my baseline, and then I can move into my other loyalties from there. So this is, I'm explaining this, I'm giving you that beautiful spiritual perspective, but in this context of like why I mentioned in first aid, this is just one of many examples of why that loyalty to self first is practical. So like selfishness is not all bad. I remember my mentor be like, you just need a little bit of it. Just a little bit. Maybe you can say like a tiny grain or something. Because I have to make sure I have me first. Right? Think about the example, like I don't know if you've ever flown, I mentioned this before and I'll mention it again, but it's a perfect example. Like if you've ever flown a plane and you have like the flight attendant giving you instructions about in case of emergencies, especially if there's been a decrease in air pressure and they'll have like these air masks fall down. And they always say, put on your air mask first before helping someone else. So I just want to emphasize that it's not a bad thing to just make sure you have yourself. The moment when I start forgetting other people and I just make myself the center of everything, that's when it becomes an issue. And there's a distinction between that and recognizing that I am the center of my inner world. You are the center of your inner world. You are not the center of the world. There's a big difference. And again, it goes back to, it starts with me, then I move out to first loyalty, then to my second loyalty, my friends, colleagues, you name it. And then as farther out to the bigger picture. So that was a beautiful reminder. And at least I wanted to use this opportunity to share with you that because it's such an important thing. And I think with the knowledge and just like the sincerity, it takes a couple things, but like those being for starters, to be able to have that healthy relationship with myself. Because I'm sure you've probably seen unhealthy relationships with people with themselves in the form of narcissism, egotism, and all those things, where it's like me first, me second, me third. That kind of mentality, that situation is an unhealthy relationship with themselves. It's not a healthy one. But it's just, so I just think that's a very important thing that I want to emphasize. And what I was beautifully reminded of, with this training. And this, again, one example. I'm sure there are many other examples where that you can apply this. And that's why it's always practical. And it's always like, when I get myself involved in things, it's like, okay, I'm starting from myself first. Okay. And then I move in. And then once I come out of the opportunity, I would also add, it's important that I come back to myself, right? Because there might be moments when I have to consider the other person, and maybe there might be moments and when there needs to be some selflessness, and I think about the other person. But when it comes to safety, if safety is involved, well, I have to include my own, not just the person that I'm working with, right? But again, that just in that specific context. But there might be situations where, selflessness may work, but after all that is said and done, and let's say I'm helping somebody, that's for a finite period of time. Eventually, I've got to come back to myself because guess what? I have a life to live. I have a responsibility to live my life just as you do, just as your neighbor. That's a fact. It's part of why we came here to this school. To live our lives, to be of service, to give of ourselves to others, because it is in doing that we grow spiritually. We expand. We uplift together. We can achieve a whole lot of things together. Think about the third loyalty, the bigger picture, creating those ripple effects. So I definitely wanted to just squeeze that part in because there's a lot of misconceptions about, I think, where it's like of selfishness and of people talking about like, even just like the idea of self-care. I feel like sometimes people may feel some type of way about that, but it's deep down, it's such an important thing. Got to make sure I have me first. Because, like I said, depending on the situation, if I don't do that, then I become a liability to others. And who wants to be that? Do you? Because I certainly don't. So, going back to the breath. So, I don't know if I share this, but what makes the technique even more powerful is that, and something you can do as well. Like I said, I'm sharing this because because this is a powerful thing that I think it's a very powerful life skill to have. When you're inhaling twice, tense your muscles, particularly your shoulders and your neck area. Like purposely tension it. And then when you exhale, relax it. And just let that exhalation extend to like 3 to 4 seconds. So it's like tense and then relax. And that's the reset technique. And so I wanted to just share that with you, my friend, because I'm all about making it practical. And I think that's like I said, life happens, and there are times when life can feel so chaotic. But it's when it's in those moments of chaos is when I need to make sure I got myself together. Meaning I am not fragmented. I am centered on myself. I'm level-headed. I can think clearly, more or less. And working with the breath is a powerful tool, And even and to give you somewhat perspective, because I think, it's important to be aware of, like, at least for me, when I think about tools and techniques, sometimes I can be very tunnel vision or limit myself in how I can use them. But when people share, I'm like, oh, I didn't think I can use it that way. So this is what, for that intent and purpose, to help you think of different ways. I don't know about you, but I shared it earlier, but I can be a space cadet, Part of it because my first gift is prophecy is part of my main avenue of communication and how I relate with myself and other people. And how I get messages. And so I tend to daydream a lot and be in my head. At times when it's like not in my best interest and I might be thinking about something that's like, whoa, wait, what am I doing? Why am I thinking about that? And so I remember it was a moment when I was in the metro. When I was in the metro and I was going back home and I was just finding myself, thinking, ruminating. And then I was thinking about something and I was just like, give me a little bit of unease. And then it was a moment when I caught myself. I'm like, oh, wait, I'm here. Oh, wait. And in that moment, I actually felt my energy shift very quickly. It's almost like if it's a good way to cut the energy. Because when you think about something, the way I see it, it's like I'm feeding a slow, steady stream of energy into the thought or idea, whatever it is that's occupying me mentally. Think about those thoughts that live rent-free in your head, right? Don't let them live rent-free in your head. Give them direction. But like when I'm thinking about them, it's like I'm imagining like a stream of my life force energy going towards that thing. And mind you, it could be something great or it can be something crap. But when I do that breath technique, it severs that flow. It cuts it. And then it helps to bring that remaining energy that I was sending to it back to myself. Again, the way I'm explaining it kind of might be weird or something, but it really, the emphasis there, like that cutting of that energy, so that I'm just like, it's almost like that feeling of just snapping out of it, like, oh, like I felt myself, I was in a daze, or like I was in some kind of hypnosis, but now I'm like, whoa, I'm here. Where am I? I'm here. I'm here. Hello. I'm pinching myself. I'm here. I'm here. Or even like the tension of like when someone's like pinches you, if you're like daydreaming or something, or like there's that pinch that happens, like, hey, wake up, because of the pain, it helps to bring back. Although the breath technique is great because you don't have to rely on pain to get yourself out of whatever it is that's going on, whatever you're thinking about. At least whatever I'm thinking about in my head, I don't have to rely on pain. Just when I catch myself, and so one of the things that when I was sharing there at the training, I was sharing with the folks there to emphasize that it's an important thing to practice it whenever, wherever. So I shared that example of moment when I was trying to make that practical, right? You know, and it's amazing how the ways that spirit works, and just like, especially in certain containers, like I said, like this one that was pretty high energy, and just to have that experience for myself where I was able to just practice, because that's the most important thing. That practice is a requirement for the growth to happen. If I'm not practicing, then there's not going to be any growth at all. And if there's no growth, then at that point I'm just dying spiritually, which could at some point affect my physical body. That's why, I emphasize a lot of like the learning and growing, because it's not for learning and growing for the sake of it, because of someone else's outer concept. It's because it's a need of the soul to expand. It's expansion. If I'm not expanding, then I'm contracting. And when I contract, my light dims. And all sorts of not so good things start to happen. At some point, the star that I once was, like, and you're a star out in the universe. Think about what happens with a star that makes it become a black hole. I don't know the technical aspects to it, but eventually, like, something happens to a star where it becomes a black hole. So when you look, so my understanding of it, when I look at a black hole, or the concept of a black hole, in essence, it's a dead star. Think of it that way, Again, I don't mean to be too heavy about this or very extreme here, but I at least want to give you a bigger picture perspective of why it's important, of just really, in my spiritual growth, in my spiritual path, why it's important that I keep my childlike part of life, because it's still there, and that exists inside each and every single one of us. And even if someone may find themselves in that situation, I do believe people can come out of it. It's not the end all be all, and no one is ever destined for darkness. Period. No one. And I would attribute that because of one of the universal truths, the laws of the universe, is freedom. Innate freedom. You, me, our neighbors. Period. And so for me, again, thinking about that and sharing with my classmates, it's like, okay, how can I make this practical? How can I make this technique a way of life? Because I think that's the ultimate aim there. Like with all these practices and stuff, I think is that important shift from when something becomes a practice to a way of life. That to me is like growth, like times 100. Like, whoa. Psh. Like imagining like techniques to keep yourself cleansed and centered when you might be picking up energies from the environment, right? The concept of even cleansing oneself, of cleansing myself, when I make that a way of life, to me it's like no limitations. Immovable force, or unstoppable force. That one. Unstoppable force. And I believe everybody is an unstoppable force. you know. But the school sets the framework for all of us to have to work through and address the limitations that show up in our lives. And that's where the showing up matters, and the inner work is all about. And I can show you the way, but for you to like actually walk it and do it, that falls upon you, you know. Show the way to rise above the limitations. And it's your responsibility to be able to rise above them. You know, another way of saying it is like, I can't raise your state of awareness, your state of consciousness, except you. I can't help you reach your true feelings, your intuitive part, the part in you that is your soul, the soul you, that's connected with everything, one with all. I can't reach that for you, but you. Only you can access that within yourself. Just like I can only access that within myself, the real me, right? I would also insert as well, think like the kingdom of heaven. You are the kingdom of heaven. And only you can access that within yourself. It's a feeling you have to let in. I wouldn't say even half. I would say need to. For your own well-being, simply put. Especially navigating living in two worlds at once, what I've come to understand. Very important, my friend. And I'm just going off of my experiences. And I feel like as I move through life, like all these things that I consider fundamental, and why again I find my having this on and off relationship with breathwork. You know, maybe it's at that point now where I'm, as I'm sharing this, I feel like I need to make that a way of life. I remember my mentor at a last year, some time ago in the early spring, when I did one of his courses, he mentioned the phrase cleansing breath. And when he said it at that time, it resonated with me. I was like, cleansing breath. When I can come back to my center, when I might have been fragmented through some situation or from somebody, but just through my breath alone, and I'm just back, you know? You know, when, and I'll give you this perspective. When I'm moving in balance, my understanding of balance is like, to kind of take it deeper, a deeper understanding of it. What happens when I'm moving in balance? I have all of me together. There's that word muster, muster, muster all myself together, not fragmented, together. Think like a laser beam, right? A laser beam is freaking strong. It's very important. It's directed. It's very defined. Like that to me is what our energy is when we're moving in balance. And another way that speaks testament of why we're unstoppable when we move in balance. And so, with all that being said, and at this point in the episode, feel free to use that technique, because I definitely appreciate the instructors for sharing that with me, and I trust that my team will give me or send me reminders, and if it comes to mind for yourself, practice it, keep at it, because I think it's that practicing and making it a part of a habit, that's part of what it means to make it a way of life. Like, oh, it's part of my practice. It's part of how I show up. It's part of my spiritual protocol, kind of a thing. So think about it for yourself. How could you make this practical for yourself in your life? And I invite you to take a moment to just journal in your own free time, And maybe you not necessarily have to do it when moments of high stress. But where I could practice it more, it's like maybe waking up out of bed. Or maybe perhaps before eating my meal. Or a good place to also do it is in the bathroom. Because no one's watching you. You got your own privacy. You got your own personal space there. Especially, to me, that's one of the reasons why my spirit guides have come close to me. Because the bathroom, the restroom, is a powerful, it's a powerful space for me to come back home, to bring myself together, because we all need that, especially like feeling drained and whatnot, like using the bathroom. Or if somebody says something to you and it caught you off guard, or maybe it hurt you a little bit, And like as you're feeling, it's like it's interesting. Like when I think about it, it's like as I'm breathing in all of it, like the feelings and everything, the hurt. Like speaking for this example, particularly, say someone said something nasty to me, and I'm like, so visually, when I inhale, I'm taking in all that they said and the emotions I'm feeling, the hurt, all together, and then I'm directing it, and just as I'm exhaling, I'm sending that energy out. I don't know if that kind of gives like any kind of a visual, or at least how I'm looking at that technique. It's like, you know, like there's whatever situation where you find yourself in high stress situations. Like I said, not necessarily there, right? And it may not happen sometimes, and it's okay, because sometimes there might be situations where you might forget. But that's why, like, when there's moments throughout the day when you can instill it and make it a muscle memory, make it a way of life, built it in. Then it's like, I know for me, in those moments when I get myself like, oh shoot, high stress situation, oh my God, nervous system, oh my God. And then in that instant, I remember, oh wait, I caught myself. So what you could also do too, which to me makes it more powerful, is make it a game. Like, how often do I, can I be at that place and come back with my breath with the reset technique? Again, this is all just an invitation, but just wanted to give you some ideas, when you can do it, or even before you're doing exercises, or when you're exercising, or before you watch something, when you finish doing something, or like, oh yeah, or even that, when you're doing a task and you just finished it. Let's say maybe you've just finished doing something like for work related, and you're done, and it's a good way to kind of close the energy. Because remember, I said earlier, like it's like an energy that cuts. It's a good cutting energy, so that I'm moving in compact units. I'm not dragging on energy that needed to be resolved and left behind in the past, at the conclusion of something, right? At an opportunity. So take like work, for example. So it's like, say I'm doing something. So like for me, it's like I come back once I'm good and I've got all my tools and stuff put away after I'm doing a nice, awesome shift out in the trail, or even if something came down, something happened, then it's like before I move on to the next thing, which would be for me commuting to work or commuting back home, I'll be like, and then go. So I think whatever between activities that you're doing, in between, not necessarily doing, unless of course it's like I said, some situation that happened, like, oh shoot, stress, right? When the high stress situations, of course, in that moment, use it. If you remember, if you recognize it, use it. But in those not so high stress situations, I think that's where I mentioned like the break in between activity as a way to cut the energy and just move in compact units. Okay? Shoot, you can do it using before when you shower, before and after you shower, before and after you travel, Again, I'm just giving you ideas, want to help you out so that just make it easier, So that way you're living in the way that you're leading your life, you're leading yourself, and not being at the mercy of all the chaos in the environment. Because let's be honest, let's be real here, it's chaotic out there. But that's outside of our control. The reset technique is all about harnessing that control you always have within and won't ever change. That's all, Just sharing that powerful technique to help you restore your own autonomy, because it's always there. It's always there. And so if you made this part of the episode, I hope you got so much out of it, and I hope you feel more empowered to keep on going. And no matter what happens, no matter what may happen, for how long it maybe have happened, if you think about the reset breath, the reset technique, and let that technique work through you, let it cleanse you, let it help you to just, all right, let me move all this stuff that's coming up and then out, so that all that remains is you moving in that laser beam. Think like a laser beam. So, so thank you so much for sticking up for this part. It's a long episode, but totally worth it in my opinion for me. So I enjoyed so much sharing it. I hope you get so much out of it. And yeah, this has been another episode of the Spiritual Engineer Podcast. I'm your host, Alvin Cepeda, signing out. And as always, take care, my dear friend.